Mr. Carney goes to Washington and he gets away with something no conservative ever could. We're going to talk battles in the provinces. We're going to piss everybody off. We are deliberately going to blend politics and religion. It's the Line Podcast. Stay tuned. This episode of the Line Podcast is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and increasing regulations, today, nearly 4 million Canadians still smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco, vaping products, and oral smokeless products provide a potentially less harmful choice. Smoke-free alternatives do not involve combustion or burning, like smoking a cigarette does. Instead of heavily restricting access and information about these options, Canada's government should be adopting common-sense legislation that will help further bring down Canada's smoking rates and put information in the hands of Canadians. Information such as the relative risks compared to cigarettes. Because the products are not the same, and they shouldn't be treated the same. It's just common sense. Learn more about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at Unsmoke.ca. All right, here we go. May the 9th, 2025, and a really busy week in the news. We're going to talk about the Pope in the third segment. We're going to do some politics and religion blended. But let me just make an observation here, just in terms of the news week it was. Busy news week. Lots going on. The Prime Minister goes to Washington. That's mostly what we're going to talk about this segment. A new Pope. We had fighting updates in Ukraine. We had the victory stuff in Moscow. India and Pakistan are now fighting again, which is great. That's exactly what we need right now. What I just think is incredible, amid all that news, I am not Catholic. You are. I don't like you. We'll talk about this in the third segment. Yeah,
like most Catholics, I'm sorta Catholic.
I'm not Catholic at all. But my God, the church does pageantry well. So let me just paint a picture here, okay? Just so people get this. I'm upstairs. I'm in my kitchen, and I am making a sandwich. Like, it could not be a more boring, tranquil scene. And up on the TV, I've got a news channel running. I'm not really paying any attention to it. I'm just making a sandwich for lunch. And all of a sudden, I see a puff of white smoke. Because they had, like, the chimney was in, like, a little box in the corner of the TV. And the talking heads on TV, they weren't talking about Catholic stuff. They were just talking about, like, the news. But all of a sudden, white smoke is coming out. And the anchor's like, oh, it's white smoke. Okay, everybody, it's white smoke. Stop talking. It's white smoke. It's ready. And meanwhile, I'm eating my sandwich going, it's white smoke. Oh, my God, I got to finish my sandwich. And then, like, about 2 minutes later, it occurs to me, it's like, what do I give a shit?
Because the Catholic Church, you got to give them respect, man. Nobody lasts that long unless they've got a couple things very right. And one thing they have very right, pageantry, ritual, tradition.
I went to...
they have global media eating out of their hands every single time they do this. It's glorious.
You could hear, like, when they cut to the Rome video feed, you could just hear, like, the crowd chanting like a rock concert was about to begin. It was like, yeah! Like, you know, like the smoke machines had started and the spotlights had shot onto the stage, and you can just see background movement behind the instruments. You're like, oh my God, they're coming out. And it reminded me of when I was in London for the King's coronation. It's exactly the same thing. It's like, I've been to London a few times. Like, I love London. It's a great city. But then all of a sudden, there's men in silly uniforms on horses. And they're going clomp, clomp, clomp through the street, and they have flags. And it's like, there is something about these ridiculous monkey computers we have.
Humans are not rational beings.
No.
We are beings that respond deeply and emotively to symbol and ritual and pageantry. That is what we are. And
we need a line flag.
God love the Catholic Church for leaning in. Like, and also what I love about this is like the secular media, with the majority of people in media, I think generally speaking, are sort of atheist or maybe soft spiritual, but most of them are pretty atheistic. I'm going to get into that because I think it's an interesting conversation. But even people who are deeply atheistic cannot resist it, because it's so good. The show is so good. The emotions are so high that you just can't pull yourself away from it. It's well done.
white smoke, there's white smoke. And I'm then like 2 minutes later, I'm, wait, hang on, no, I'm not Catholic. And then I
Well,
just
the fact
turned it
that
off. And then I
and the
went and had
fact
my
that it's
sandwich.
like American Pope's really interesting. We're gonna get
We'll
into all
talk
of
about
that
that.
because, and we're gonna talk about where this intersects with politics and where this also intersects with Canadian politics because I think there's a lot to unpack there. So we're gonna get in, but first we should just focus on the news first and foremost.
So when there's a couple of federal stories that I think are worth mentioning before we get into the meat of it. I actually want to do something I don't normally do. I want to take the side of the Twitter mob and endorse them, actually. But just a couple of bullet points to run down to, just things that happened in the news this week. Pierre Poilievre will be running in an Edmonton area seat in a by-election.
It's I think further north. It's pretty. It's kind of like a rural northern Alberta. God, I should know this. Battleford. It's
Doesn't matter.
Battleford.
We've got Andrew Scheer as interim House leader for the Conservatives until Pierre Poilievre can be returned in a by-election. Pierre Poilievre eventually got around to calling Bruce Vanjoy to congratulate him. Can I just stitch together a theme here?
Yeah, go for it.
Weak loser energy coming out of Pierre Poilievre right now. And
tell me what, how, why?
I understand. Do you have to pick like deepest blue seat in the entire federation after you lose the seat you've held for 20 years?
I was so hoping he was going to run in Mindapore. I was so hoping he was going to run in my riding and he was going to door knock on my door and I would be able to like force him to talk to me. It would have been great. It would have been amazing.
I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but to me, it just radiates chicken shit loser energy. And Andrew Scheer as House leader, and I'm not even knocking Andrew Scheer here. This might sound like an unusually pointed personal attack. I don't mean it as such. I have no particular feelings about Andrew Scheer one way or the other, except that we're both Trekkies, and that's like a bond. But there are people in the Conservative caucus who I think would be better as an interim leader than Andrew Scheer.
Yeah, but
the advantage of Andrew Scheer is that he will not outshine Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, exactly. Andrew Scheer has the experience to be able to do it semi-competently, at least for a short period of time, and he's no competition to Pierre. And also, it's pretty clear that Pierre trusts the guy, probably because he knows that, and Andrew Scheer both know that, like, there's no there there. There's no threat there.
So we've got a guy who needs a week to do a congrats call to the guy who beat him. We got a guy who is putting in a no threat, no internal threat interim guy while he gets himself elected in like the deepest blue riding in Alberta that we could find. Like, you know what? Okay, I get it. Like, there's nothing wrong with having your fail-safe contingency be something that is maximized for safety. I get it.
Well, except
but, oh my God,
is North Battleford Crowfoot the safest riding? Because one of the problems he's going to run into is where do you think Alberta separatist sentiment runs highest?
I don't know by the specific riding, but I know the point you're making.
Well, look, we don't have a geographic breakdown, but I'm willing to bet separatist sentiment ain't highest in central Calgary. I'll tell you that. Yeah. It's going to be probably highest in rural Alberta, and especially I'm willing to bet south, yes, but especially north rural Alberta, which means a federal leader is going to have to answer some questions about his support for Alberta independence. Like, it's actually not, just because it has the highest vote count doesn't actually mean it's the safest riding.
It might not be the simplest riding, but in terms of getting him elected, I like. Let me just say, I like his odds.
Sure, I'm sure. Yeah. You know what? Yeah, he's probably going to get elected, but he's also going to probably have to face some pointed questions. Maybe if he ever subjects himself to pointed questions. Well, never mind. He's probably fine.
The funny thing is, over the last couple of weeks since the election, almost 2 full weeks, I've had a chance to look at stats. Actually, as the numbers firm up. I think it is not well understood how well the Conservatives did this election while losing. Like, this was the best losing campaign I've ever seen in my life. Pierre Poilievre, just purely as a matter of vote share, 10 days ago or so, he got more of the vote share than Justin Trudeau, Stephen Harper, or Jean Chrétien ever did while winning majorities.
Yeah, but
I'm not talking about
but
votes because it's a larger population. It's vote share.
Yeah, but it's not an apples to apples conversation because it's a vote share in the midst of a third party collapse. And people will say, well, they lost because the third party collapse. It's like, actually, they disproportionately benefited from the third party collapse.
They got more ridings, but this is one of the stats that came out this week. Abacus was polling on this. NDP voters, this is astonishing. The NDP lost something like 3/4 of its 2021 vote, but they went to the Liberals 2-1.
They went to the Liberals 2-1. Okay, so that's fair, but
I think the
ridings
the
went
splits,
to the Conservatives. But
because I think the splits worked in the Conservatives' benefit,
so, like
but
I said,
vote stampede didn't.
Basically, it runs out of just walk. Like you can't say that. Well, they gained more vote share, and this is a comparable to previous elections because the previous elections, of course, they had smaller vote share in a three-party system. Like it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. You can only talk about vote share when you're talking about now a two-party. I'm talking outside of Quebec, however. I'm talking about if we're in a two-party system in Anglo-Canada, now the only comparable vote share to really gauge whether or not he's done well or poorly is against other two-party races.
Yeah, I know.
Right? Otherwise, it's not an apples-to-apples.
No, but I think in terms of the Conservatives the Conservatives did what they thought they needed to do reasonably, and they did it. It just ended up being wrong.
Fair enough.
They
just
hit
not
the target.
Enough.
It's like I'm like, sorry, this is a politically incorrect example.
Oh, no.
I kind of remember back in like the Iraq War era where like some drone would hit like the building that like Saddam had been in like an hour earlier. The attack went as planned. He just wasn't there anymore. The Conservative campaign went as planned. Saddam had simply left the bunker.
Yeah, well, that was a fairly crucial point, though.
Yeah, no, I know.
I want to talk about Carney and Trump. Matt, you had opinions about Carney and Trump. I also kind of had I still can't bring myself to hate Mark Carney. I'm sorry, my dear listeners of the line.
I thought, you know what? So here, what I'm going to say, I think, is going to be polarizing, but it's not going to be because of what I say first. What I'm going to say first is I think Mark Carney did fine.
Yeah.
I think he did exactly what he had to do. I think he did. And
as well as anyone could reasonably be expected to do, given the impossible situation of dealing with Trump. Like,
I do not think it was possible, I do not think it was realistically possible for Mark Carney to have done any better than he did.
Sure.
Was it going to be enough? I don't know, because we're seeing like one of my favorite Trump moments this week was like between like Wednesday and Thursday, he went from tax the rich to don't tax the rich. Like, I think we have to kind of mention this. It just bears repeating. There will be no coherent policy positions in the Trump White House. The only policy files that will actually have policy coherence will be the ones Trump is not personally involved in. There might well be parts of the U.S. government under President Trump that are running coherent operations. Love them or hate what they're doing, but it's only going to be because Trump ain't paying attention. So whatever Mark Carney accomplished this week, don't know if it's going to matter, but I do think he did an okay job. The point that I want to make, and I hate that I'm agreeing with some of the most annoying people on social media. You know what I hate doing, Jen? I hate ever playing imagine if a conservative did this game. Because no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my entire life responding to hypothetical scenarios from alternate universes. I want to respond to what's actually happening. And anytime I hear someone going, well, can you even imagine if this happened? Like, no, fuck off. I don't want to do that. But I'm sitting on my couch watching the presser from the White House. And I'm looking at what Carney's saying. And again, I think he's doing about as good a job as he can. And I'm thinking to myself, can you imagine if this was Prime Minister Poilievre? Because Mark Carney called Donald Trump a transformational leader, which I thought was clever because
transformation doesn't always mean in a good direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Rapid, unplanned disassembly is what the rocket nerds call it. I'm just trying to. So Mark Carney goes to Washington, pushes back on 51st state talk. Like I'm not saying he didn't hold the line. He did. But he did it politely, and he did it in a
very
friendly
Canadian
way.
He's being very Canadian about it.
He posed for a photo with the president in the Oval Office where they're both throwing a thumbs up. if Pierre Poilievre had been elected 10 days ago and had gone to the Oval Office and had said literally verbatim everything Mark Carney had said, and then posed for a thumbs up picture in the Oval Office, 40% of this country would be fucking out of their minds right now.
Probably, yep.
And I absolutely hate the fact that I am indulging in this whataboutism, because I think this stuff is corrosive and I think it is unhelpful. But in this case, it's true.
Okay, but
the worst people in the world are right sometimes.
Okay, but at the same time, context matters.
Context
matters. Part of the reason why people would be losing their mind is because they would read into that the idea that Pierre had some sympathy with Trump's sort of broader pan-conservative project. No one credibly believes that of Mark Carney. That's the context, right? So yes, is it true that Carney can do stuff with Trump that Pierre can't? Yes. Is there a reason why Carney can do stuff that Pierre can't? Also, yes.
Yeah. Context matters. Some of the context is bullshit.
Sure.
You can, I remember years ago when the Liberals under Justin Trudeau basically had the attitude of everyone in my caucus is going to vote pro-choice. We know, because some of these Liberal MPs have been around a long time, we know that some of these guys have pro-life views. We know that.
Mark Carney himself may actually have personal pro-life views.
We also knew for a fact that no one was going to take that and turn it into hidden agenda or what are they hiding? Why does Justin Trudeau allow these people in his caucus? There are people in the Liberal caucus who want to take away a woman's right to choose. Haven't we seen what's happening in the United States? Haven't you read Margaret Atwood?
Yes, but that's because people fundamentally trust the Liberals as a party and an institution to rein that shit in, and people don't fundamentally trust the Conservatives as an institution to rein that shit in. That's the difference. Yes, are they getting different treatment? Yes, they are getting different treatment. Is the difference of treatment justified? That's the actual question.
No, it's understandable, but it's not justified. I understand what the difference is. I know what the difference is. The difference is bullshit. Mark Carney can get away with saying things and posing for pictures that Pierre Poilievre can't. And
maybe that's why Canada elected him.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely why Canada elected him.
Right.
The Liberals get the benefit of being what they say they are, and the Conservatives are judged based on what people fear they are. And this is one of the rare examples. You know me, I don't rant about media bias because I've made this point many, many times before. I don't think there's a left-wing media bias in this country. I think people misunderstand what the issue is. There is an urban bias in media. That's not the same thing as left versus right wing. The media in this country is not full of a bunch of people who identify themselves as politically left. The media in this country is full of people with university educations who live in the densest parts of downtown cities. There is a demographic difference, not a political one. But this is one of those cases where the people who scream on Twitter are right about this one. And I think they're wrong about 95% of the time, but I think they're right on this. And I don't know what we do about it because I understand sometimes why the Conservatives go apeshit. I don't think
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. The only thing I would say is, like, if you want to address that double standard, the way to go about addressing that double standard isn't necessarily to scream at media and only do interviews with the most fringy of the fringe on YouTube. The way to go about the double standard is to address the inherent trust issue, right? And to try and tackle that in a systematic and generational way, to try and understand where the trust issue comes from.
Can I play devil's advocate, though? And
sure.
I agree with you, because here's what I think is happening, and this is where I'm going to unite everyone right now just by pissing everybody off at once. I understand why the Conservatives are angry. How the Conservatives have acted on their anger is fucking stupid. So, like a plague on all their houses, or what's the actual Shakespeare? A pox on all their houses?
Yeah.
I heard somebody screw up a line of Shakespeare this week, and it pissed me off, and now I think I just did the same thing. So, apologies to the lit majors. I think how the Conservatives have responded is stupid. and counterproductive and harmful. I want to ask a question, though, and it's a completely neutral question. Asking this total sincerity, putting this to you. Are the Conservatives ever going to be able to do enough to change this? Or is it an impossible mission?
Well,
because I know they've concluded it's an impossible mission.
Well, I'll answer that question. As I said, I don't necessarily think that they need to be pandering to mainstream media all the time or anything like that, or that that's necessarily a wise move. I don't have an issue with the Conservatives concluding that the legacy media or whatever is a lost cause and just reformulating their media strategy accordingly. That's a legitimate political strategic decision for them to make. And it doesn't upset me. The problem with that they're doing is that they are feeding into a persecution complex that winds up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So we're going to alienate all the legacy media. We're going to shut them out. We're going to treat them like shit. We're going to do no interviews with them. But the mainstream media is not covering us. It's a conspiracy. The mainstream media doesn't cover you. You don't get outside of the voter bubbles that you're looking for, and you can't find your persuadable votes. You lose the election. The mainstream media went and did it. Mm-hmm. What's the answer to that question? Well, we'll just cut out the mainstream media and we'll only stick to talking to the people we want to talk to. Like, it winds up becoming this self-fulfilling prophecy that repeats itself over time and time and time again. And I think that one of the major problems that the Conservatives have here, and as I said, it's the grievance politics. The grievance politics is killing conservative politics. And it's the reason why it's killing conservative politics isn't necessarily because there isn't a double standard or that the Conservatives don't have legitimate complaints. The problem is that the grievance politics is forcing them into a position where they keep on making the same mistakes over and over again, and then getting angrier that they're not accepting change. They're what's the way I'm trying to explain this here? They're losers. They act like losers.
Hey, I'm the guy who started by saying Poilievre's got loser energy right now.
Yeah, this is the grievance politics gives off loser energy, and when you give off loser energy, you lose. It's not that complicated. Now, do I think that the Conservatives can ever get themselves to a standard with progressive, or like an equal standard with? I don't know, but maybe they should try. Maybe the strategies that they've been employing to date are not proving to be productive for them, and it might be time to reconsider the strategies that are proving not productive for them.
I don't know what else I would tell them to do. And what I think is interesting...
How about maybe try and... I said, maybe the media strategy that they employed was counterproductive. Maybe they should reconsider the media strategy that they're employing. Maybe they should, instead of just automatically assuming that every single person who operates in media who isn't running, even people like J.J. McCullough got shut out.
He was very disappointed, Mr. Poilievre, yeah.
You know what I mean? He's not even just shutting out the legacy media, which might be a defensible media strategy. He's shutting out any independent media that isn't explicitly partisan. He didn't do shit with us. We're not legacy media anymore. We're considered center right. But he knew that if he were to do an interview with us, he'd actually get a hard interview. And can't do that. We'd be hard. That'd be hard. I can think of lots of things I would recommend that they would do to sort of maybe try to reset the conversation a little bit.
How, and all those things you could think of, how confident are you they'd work?
Well, I don't know, but you don't know, how is this working? Is this working? Is this what you're doing working? Is just being angry and aggrieved and losing all the time and being losers working for you? Is that functioning? You have to change because you don't have a choice. Are you here to actually govern the country, or are you here to give people a place to vent their feels? Is that your institutional role as a party? This is the question. What is your institutional role as a party? Is your institutional role as a party going to be to give people give angry and aggrieved people a place to channel their feelings and emotions, which I think is legitimate? If that's your institutional role, is to be a sponge for anger and grievance. Okay, that's fair. You're serving a role in democracy by doing that. You're giving people an outlet and a channel and a rage. But that role as an institution is incompatible with the role of government and governing people. So if the Conservative Party wishes to be Canada's anger sponge, That's fair. They're doing a great job at being an anger sponge. No one's electing an anger sponge. So make your choice. What is it that you want to be? What role do you want to serve in the polity? I don't think there's a wrong answer. They can be whatever they want.
I'm going to go up a rung because I think we're talking about this at the kind of the realm of party politics. I want to talk about more as the realm of society.
Sure.
I don't know if the Conservatives could reasonably do anything that would get them to the point where a significant percentage of the voting population would not be convinced that there was a Stephen Harper hidden agenda somewhere.
Well, Stephen Harper's looking pretty good now, isn't he? Stephen Harper were to actually be leading the last election in the Conservative Party, he would have won a strong majority.
Probably. But I still think... I remember we published this piece, this is years ago now, by Mitch Heimpel, a friend of the line, who talked about kind of this tension in the conservative movement of we kept trying to win in the middle. And eventually we just decided that wasn't going to work, so they went to go build a coalition elsewhere. Now, the problem, of course, that they just ran into like 8 or 9 days ago is that didn't work either. So this is kind of the point that Jen is making, and she's not wrong to make it. But I think just as a societal level, we can probably say somewhere around 35% of the population would be identifiably conservative in their political leanings. If 35% of the population does not see a democratic outlet for their feelings and hopes and fears, that's a problem. And that problem's going to manifest itself in different ways. One of the ways might be something we're going to talk about in Jen's neck of the woods coming up in the next segment. I don't know.
I just don't accept the fatalism. I just think fatalism, personally, I think it's wrong. I think it's intellectually wrong. And secondly, I think it's pointless. It gets you nowhere to be fatalistic about these things. Look,
but they're not being fatalistic. That's the problem.
You're being fatalistic. You're saying
it's not my job to worry about it. Like I'm just saying, if they were paying me to advise them what to do to break through in the GTA at this point, I'd be like, fuck if I know.
Well, I mean, I could suggest things that they did wrong in the last election. There are lessons that they could learn about how to tweak this. And also, the other thing I'd point out is in a two-party system, a couple points more is all they need. Like, they don't need to win 15 more points to get a majority election. They need Carney to lose 2% and to gain 3%. Like, they're within striking distance in a two-party system of a strong majority government here. Mm-hmm. They just have to make a sort of an internal institutional choice about what they want to be. Do you want to be a fatalistic anger sponge and a place for people to park their legitimate grievances with the systemic problems of Canada, which is fair? There are systemic problems with Canada. That's great. Or do you want to run a government that has a plan for actually addressing those grievances and fixing them? Because right now I'm not seeing a party that has a real plan for addressing those grievances in a way that fixes them. I don't see that.
I absolutely agree with you, and I've said this many times before, that the Conservative Party did not run a great election campaign. No argument. I think they made a lot of dumb mistakes. Jen's talking about the media strategy. I still think the biggest mistake was spending 3 weeks thinking that they could deal with the Trump issue by giving like one speech.
Yeah.
But I still am honestly wondering, call it fatalism if you want. I think it's more speculating, but if they had done exactly what you had wanted them to do, if they'd done exactly what I had wanted them to do, you still get Mark Carney out there going, well, Pierre Poilievre, he'd be too close to Donald Trump. And millions of voters would go, yep. And I don't know what you do about that.
But also maybe that's because he did run campaigns and messaging that was too close to Donald Trump. I just think that level of fatalism is incompatible with the lead that they were running like 6 months ago. The lead that they sustained for more than a year. I just don't think that that's true. I think they made some incremental mistakes that led to incremental losses that failed to push them over the line. And I think that if they had made incremental change, like I said, is it possible that in the most perfect world where they had done everything right, that they would still have lost to Mark Carney in this election? Yes, but it was one election. It's also possible that they could have a strong majority 2 years from now.
I think there's every chance of that. Yeah.
And look, if every election is an opportunity to parse through your choices and figure out in hindsight whether or not those choices hurt you or helped you. I don't think that there's necessarily radical overhauls that the Conservatives need to do. Like, one of the mistakes, things that you and I were screaming about, they didn't announce a transition team. One of the things they could have done back in January, February, when the polls were still working with them.
Meet your next government.
Meet your next government. We're ready to go. We have people going through the files. We've got systemic problems in this country, and we're going to hit the ground running, fixing them. Acting like prime minister, they could have done that at any time.
Here's your next finance minister. Here's your next foreign affairs minister. Here's your next defense minister, etc.
And not even announce the cabinet. They could have literally just announced a transition team. Like, here, we've got the smartest conservative minds on the paper, on the ticket, or sorry,
Which
like,
they
working behind the screen. Did they?
Oh, they hired some really smart people who were working on stuff, and they never talked about it.
They hired a couple of people that you and I know to work behind the scenes to come out with a platform that had a bunch of highly minor incremental policies, some of which were very good policies.
But that's not the fault of the people. That was a strategic decision to announce as little as possible. So I agree with you 100% on the strategic decision. But it's not even that they didn't have the people. They had them. They just didn't want to use them.
But they didn't. And also what those people came up with was insufficient to meet the crisis of the moment. I think
they came up with the maximum they were allowed to come up with.
Hey man, I'm not dissing the policy guys. The policy guys I know are beavering away in the background. But if you're going to say, look, all of Canada is broken and we have deep systemic problems, the answer to those questions is not, $5,000 TFSA top-ups and ending plastic straws. The policy positions that they announced,
returning plastic straws.
Sure,
returning plastic straws. All over that.
Sorry, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't. That was one of the lack of team, the lack of broad vision, the lack of acting ministerial, the tone problems, the fact that for a year and a half they'd been sort of aping a lot of Trumpy tone and language, if not policy. I mean, all of this stuff added up, and they were all the result of not external factors and the Canadian public just being against them for irrational reasons. They were the result of strategic mistakes that the Conservatives made, that we, among other people, were screaming about them at the time.
Mm-hmm. I don't like it.
I
don't like it when the Liberals, and this is something the Conservatives will do, and it pisses me off when they do. The Liberals have been extremely clear that they're not going to go after home equity in primary residences. And when they say that, I believe them, not because I trust them as being a bunch of nice guys, but because it would be politically radioactive. It's the same reason I believe the Conservatives when they say they're never going to touch abortion.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's sort of when someone is telling me they're not going to do a thing that it would be radically stupid for them to do, I believe them. And I think the Liberals get benefit of the doubt in this country that the Conservatives don't. And I think some of it is fair and some of it's not.
I agree. Some of it isn't fair. I think you're right. But if that is true, then the onus is on the Conservatives to rebuild the trust required to get that benefit of the doubt, because that's the only option available to them.
If someone has judged you on an irrational basis, I don't think the onus is on you.
Oh, okay. So great. If you're going to put the onus on changing everybody's mind on the voter, good luck with that.
Oh,
that's not
I think it's going to work.
That's not a winning strategy.
All right,
that's just not a winning strategy.
Go find the people who hate you on Twitter and convince them you actually mean well.
I can't, but
exactly.
I don't need those people to vote for me.
You might in some contexts.
Well, and also, by the way, and you're never going to persuade. You're never going to be able to persuade the 10% of the haters or the 20% of the haters. That's not a gettable get. But I don't presume that 80% of the world hates me because of the 20 people on Twitter who do. That's the difference. I'm not persecuted. I'm not being persecuted by 20 people on Twitter, and I don't operate and work through my life assuming that I'm a giant persecuted person, and therefore behave in a way that would make those people hate me more.
I think the Conservatives have more of a roadblock on that front than you do.
Well, of course they do, but I'm just a person and a hack. I'm not a political party. But I can't operate on that assumption. I can't assume that 99% of Canada is totally hating me and irrationally opposed to me because of the handful on people on Twitter who are crazy about me in a bad way. I can't operate in that world. I have to operate in the world where I assume the vast majority of people aren't paying that much attention and don't care, and that if I want to persuade those people to vote for me or to buy into my policy view, the onus is on me to try and present a persuasive case from a persuasive individual.
If that's your operating assumption, the only question I would have for you is, what if your operating assumption is wrong?
Well, then you're doomed anyway, and you might as well just accept your role that you're never going to govern, and your entire role in the polity is just to be a grievance sponge. Great, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. Golf claps.
And that is when Jen arrived at the same fatalism point that I was at 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, but I just don't believe that's true. I just don't believe that's true.
I'm not convinced it's not. I don't know if it is either.
Well, we'll see. Look. The conservatives will never cease to give you an opportunity to demonstrate that they're the victims of a grand conspiracy against them, and so therefore their behavior doesn't matter, and so therefore they can do whatever they want.
I don't think, you know what, Jen, I'm going to reject that. I think you're dismissing my argument on a basis that I haven't made. I'm not saying it's a grand conspiracy. I'm saying it's just,
I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm just saying I think that.
Yeah, no, but I'm not gonna have this conversation on the basis of maximalist positions. I'm just making a simpler point. You know, when I was growing up in Ontario, no one had heard of Mike Harris for years, except every time he got brought up as a boogeyman. And I don't know how a political party defeats a boogeyman. And I think the Conservatives have made all kinds of operational mistakes. They made all kinds of tactical mistakes, and they've made policy mistakes. But some of what's killing them is the boogeyman. And I don't know how you beat a boogeyman.
Well, I mean, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't. Maybe there's nothing that they can do to overcome the boogeyman factor. That's right. But I know that if people consider me the boogeyman, there is a point where I have to stop and ask myself if I've done anything to warrant that appellation. And if there's anything that I need to address or change about my behavior in order to cease to be a boogeyman. And I got the fuck off Twitter. There's always a line to be made about, how do you be true to yourself and true to your principles and not be willing to waver in those principles. And okay, but if everyone around me is calling me the asshole, maybe I am the asshole. Mm-hmm. There's a line between those two positions, and sometimes you need to have enough discretion and judgment to step back from yourself and ask, okay, where does that line sit for me in the sand right now? Am I being reasonable? Am I being the asshole? Have I missed something about my own behavior? And this is a pretty bare minimum standard that we expect out of adults.
What I tell people, including myself sometimes, is that there is only one common factor in every failed relationship, every fight, every unpleasant social interaction I've ever had in my life. There's only one universal constant: me.
Yeah.
So,
that's the only part that you can fundamentally control. You can't control other people. You can only control your own behavior and make sure it's in accordance with your own values. But also, the biggest monsters on earth are utterly convinced that they're victims. Have you not noticed that trend?
Victims or angels?
Victims or angels. I'm an angel. There's nothing I've ever done wrong. And I'm a victim of external circumstance that is always beyond my control. Always, every single time.
Other than truly legit psychopaths, no bad guy thinks he's the bad guy.
Yeah, like this is narcissistic personality disorder. Mm. The biggest assholes on earth are utterly convinced that there's nothing that they could have ever done differently. And they're just everyone else is out to get them. Mm-hmm.
Well, I've met one or two of those in my time, yeah.
Well, right, but I mean, does that pathology not strike you as being a little bit on the nose when we're talking about the Conservative Party?
It does. But I also think other iterations of this Conservative Party that didn't have that pathology, they couldn't get past the boogeyman either. The pathology, I don't think, is inherent. I think they adopted it.
Maybe. And like I said, maybe there's nothing that they can do to change that now, and they're doomed forever. But I don't think they have any choice but to try to address it and try to correct course.
Oh, they have choices. I think we'll get into them in our next segment. Stick around, folks. We'll be back in a minute. We're going to go to the provinces now. Lots to talk about on that front. This is The Line Podcast. We'll be back. This episode of The Line Podcast is also brought to you by Innovative Medicines Canada. With a new government in place, one thing remains clear. Canada must continue to prioritize patients and healthcare innovation. Innovative Medicines Canada is focused on collaborating with all levels of government to improve access to life-saving medicines and develop a healthcare system that prioritizes patients, ignites innovation, and drives economic growth. Canada's innovative medicine sector plays a critical role, not just in health outcomes, but in keeping us competitive on the global stage. That's why, even during a moment of political change, Innovative Medicines Canada is staying focused on the issues that matter most to Canadians. And as Canada moves forward with national pharmacare, Innovative Medicines Canada believes it's possible to expand access without limiting choice by strengthening what works and fixing what doesn't. Visit innovativemedicines.ca to learn more. Jen is going to do most of the talk in this segment, I think. We're going to talk provincial stuff, but I got a couple of funny things I want to share from Ontario. And they're not like ha-ha funny. They're more, God, somebody shoot me funny. I want to give an update to something I've told the listeners about before. And I've tweeted about it too, so some people might know what I'm talking about here. But about, I'm looking at the calendar here, not about, exactly 5 weeks ago, as part of just some forward-thinking estate planning I'm doing and my parents are doing, because, you know, we're all getting older, I began filing requests for paperwork from the government so that myself, my sister, my mom, and my dad, we would all have a nice, clean file with essential documents in it. Just, you know, God forbid, right? And on April the 2nd, I asked for my grandfather's birth certificate from the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. And I asked for my own birth certificate from the province of Ontario where I live. I got my grandfather's birth certificate in 5 days. Not business days, 5 days, from a Wednesday to a Monday. It is now 5 weeks. I still don't have my Ontario birth certificate. I do have a copy of it, like one of the little square ones. Why can the British send me a dead man's almost 100-year-old record across the Atlantic Ocean in 5 days, while the Ontario government cannot send a living Ontarian an Ontario document to Ontario in 5 weeks? What are we doing? What is this? It makes me sad and it makes me frustrated. I'm just going to keep giving updates on this until I get the fucking documents. Because this is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, that is ridiculous.
How are we supposed to run a country where, and this is not complicated. Like, I provided the Ontario government when I was asking for my own birth. They literally
have to check the database, make sure that you are a person who is born in the place you claim you are, and then print it onto the pretty paper.
And mail it.
And then mail it.
And I'm starting to think, and this is pissing me off, there is the possibility of another postal strike coming up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. You're not going to get that.
If I don't get it soon, I might not get it at all.
Mm-hmm.
For potentially months. Mm-hmm. And the British sent me the envelope, and I just noticed this. They were still using Queen Elizabeth stamps, so I guess they haven't.
They got to go through the stock. I mean, that's
I don't think they have yet, but yes. And it was on a Wednesday, file the request on a Monday, paper in hand. Still don't have it. There's this joke that Torontonians tell each other that Toronto is an hour from Toronto, just because of how bad the traffic here is. This is like some provincial government version of that. And the other thing that made me laugh, and it's related to this, it's totally different. This is just local news I was reading this week. But you know what the Gardiner Expressway is, right? Like,
yeah.
Do I need to explain that?
No, it's the highway that runs along the lake, right?
Yeah, it's an elevated expressway that kind of goes underneath Toronto, so to speak. And
also rather notoriously blocks most of Toronto from the actual lake, because it's an elevated expressway between the lake and Toronto. So all the nice parts are then a highway.
There's a big freeway running through the middle of it, Right. That's kind of less of a big deal now because Toronto has expanded south of the Gardiner. But okay, so you know what I'm talking about. It's the expressway that runs. So it has required massive repairs and upgrading over the last few years. And I'm a realist. I get it. Road work sucks. There's no perfect way to do road work, okay? It's
Especially
always going to be an inconvenience.
Yeah.
But what I loved was that there was this statement out quoting like provincial politicians who were lauding the fact that one segment of the repairs has been finished way ahead of schedule. And the reason it was finished way ahead of schedule was because the government of Ontario, and this was like the press release that the politicians were touting, stepped up with $73 million additional dollars to operate the roadwork crews 24/7. So the idea was like, this is one of our major transportation arteries. We're just going to go. We're going to run round-the-clock crews. It's going to cost us extra money, but we're going to get it done about a year ahead of schedule. And I started to think about that when I read that, because It struck me as this fascinating little mindset and the mentality that governs a province that cannot send an Ontarian his Ontario birth certificate in Ontario. Why do we think of it as spending an extra $73 million to take the exceptional step of running 24/7 shifts to restore a piece of critical economic infrastructure? Why isn't 24/7 shifts the default? And I know it's like a semantic difference, but I actually think it's more of a psychological difference. Why would any group of rational people be like, this is a piece of critical economic infrastructure? No one says otherwise. As long as it is partially demolished, it is going to be clusterfucking the surface traffic in our largest city and economic engine. Again, statement of fact, no one is denying it. But that at some point in the process, the politicians decided to do this thing 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There's something weird with this country. And I don't know what it is, and I don't know how we fix it. But it's just like we had the Ontario government putting out press releases celebrating doing something that should have been the default. And I laughed, but I was sad. And I wanted to share my sadness.
I feel and relate with your sadness. The only thing I'd say is we in Alberta have privatized registry services. This is actually pretty good. There was a lot of controversy about privatizing such things, but now you go to
my experience is good, or what you have is good?
No, what we have is reasonably good. Like there's a registries agent usually within like a 10-minute drive of everywhere. You go to the private registries agent. The lines, there's usually lines, but it's not too bad. You go in, you ask for the thing, you pay a fee, they mail you the thing. And of course, if one registries agent is bad, you can go to an alternative registries agent. It's not a bad system because it means that if one is notoriously terrible customer service or long lineups or anything, you can literally just drive to the other one.
What's interesting, first of all, yeah, that sounds good.
Like I said, is it like, look, is anybody going to enjoy going down to a registries agent, no matter who runs it, in order to get a copy of a government document? No, that is never going to be anyone's peak experience in life. But
you know what? Maybe for some of them it is, and that's sad.
Well, that's sad. But we have exactly as many registries agents as the market can bear with and the costs are fixed. So it's not like one of them can jack up the costs on you. It's the same price to get the document. The user fees are not nothing, but they're not unreasonable. You know,
it's fascinating because first of all, yes, please. Sign me up for that. I'd be down with that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I've been telling you about my birth certificate. Ontario man, born in Ontario, writing from Ontario to get mail sent to Ontario. And this is like, Ontario is like clusterfuck. Like, fuck, man, we don't know what to do. I also had to get a copy of my marriage certificate. And again, this is 100% for future estate planning. Like, it's just like we had some copies already, especially from like when my wife changed her name, life insurance, things like that. So we had a couple of copies of our marriage certificate, but I just wanted like a clean copy to put it right into the envelope in case of insurance issues or anything like that. And I got that in like a week. So is the person in Ontario who sits in a cubicle and does marriage certificates just better at it? This is the frustrating thing. It's so opaque. So I needed 2 documents from the Ontario government. Got one of them really quickly. One of them, no frigging clue. Why? I don't know how businesses and families are supposed to plan around this. And I haven't.
Would you like me to try and get your birth certificate from the Alberta registries? We can see if we can make that happen.
At a certain point, I'm getting increasingly open to the idea. I haven't freaked out on anyone in public yet. Like, these are the extent of the public comments I've made about it. Mm-hmm. I haven't written a column. I haven't put any heads up on Pikes about this. I'm starting to think maybe I should. Like, maybe it's time just for a Hey Ontario, why you suck column.
So privatizing registries agents actually made a lot of sense. And I actually think Alberta did okay.
That? When was that? Is that like a 30 years ago thing?
It was probably like a Ralph Klein thing. Like, right now we're in the process of privatizing health services, which, I mean, that's not going super smoothly. We don't need to get into that in length at the moment, but there's something to be said for look, I mean, does the government need to be the only person who can print out your birth certificate and send it to you? This is kind of routine, banal, like it's not specialist work, right?
It's like when passports broke down. Like,
Yeah.
it's not literally you have one job, but it's kind of you have one job-ish.
Well, there's also something to be said about, as Warren Buffett would say, you make your back room someone else's front room. Is that, now that sounds dirty. It's not. It's really not dirty. But what that basically means is
Warren Buffett.
One of the major problems that major corporations and governments and things run into is that they try to do more and more and more and more and more, right? So they take on more and more capabilities and competencies. And the problem is that the more you try to take on, the more spread thin you are in terms of your resources, your specialty, your talent, your bandwidth, and your attention. So what tends to happen is the stuff that's fringe to your operation gets neglected. In the Lines case, the stuff that's fringe to our operation is like our accounting. Like neither you or I are particularly committed to being on top of our accounting because we're, loser writers who are hyper-focused on
Getting my birth certificate.
Well, no, we're loser writers hyper-focused on writing and doing stuff writing. So how do we make our back room someone else's front room? How do we offload the stuff that is not our speciality, invoice management?
Brought in help.
And do the stuff that we are here to do, which is editorial. And the answer is we brought in help. We hired someone to help us with this. This was the right answer. So, that I understand we're a small scale, but most companies realize that. Most companies get to a point where they get large enough that they need to hire people or they need to ultimately outsource entire departments of their companies to specialists, because the specialist who manages our taxes not only is going to be able to do it in a fraction of the amount of time that we can do it in, but they're going to do it 20 times better because the person who's doing our taxes does nothing but taxes. So they know where all of the tax write-offs are. They know what's legal. They know what's not. It would take me 10 times longer to do half as good a job as that person because I'm not a specialist at it. Managing through government databases and printing someone's birth certificate on a fancy piece of paper and mailing it out doesn't necessarily need to be a core competency of government. There are other organizations that would be very happy to do that for a reasonable profit, and they'd be able to do it twice as efficiently and probably more effectively.
Look, everybody complains about the local Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's like a universal gripe.
And look, I'm not going into the Alberta Registry Service and getting a massage here. It's not like a pleasant experience.
Yeah, front office and back office massage.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think, though, I would make the case, and I'm going to do that obnoxious live streaming podcasting. Put it in the comments. Reply in the comments, guys. But some people who've actually had the experience of living abroad in different jurisdictions, I would be interested in their experience here. I do think you could make a case that Canadian governments have a particular weakness with databases. Long gun registry, electronic health records, payroll systems, getting
COVID.
me my fucking birth certificate.
Even during COVID,
Colby
the
Kosh had
reporting.
like a whole thing going where he was writing about how like almost every jurisdiction in the world was doing almost real time. Every advanced jurisdiction, obviously, was doing like real time excess mortality calculations to figure out how many people was the pandemic actually killing. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But then we figured out that Canada would be like, we're going to know in 6 to 12 months. And that was the accelerated panic response.
Yes.
Whereas like Britain would be like, wow, last month was bad. A lot more dudes died last month than we expected. And Canada's like, well, get back to us in 18 months.
And also this really hampers research and it hampers real-time policy implementation because our data management on every level is just dreadful. I mean, one of the other things that drives me nuts all the time is there is no reason why we shouldn't have an internet accessible open court system. Court documents, for example, are public documents. They're not private. You have no expectation of privacy on a court document. I should be able to go to my provincial courthouse, punch in, this is the case I want to look at, or this is the name I want to look at, pay a reasonable fee, and get everything I need. No. In order to do that, I have to physically walk down to the courthouse and make that request. That's insane. It's all computerized. It should be open within reason, except for stuff that's maybe publication banned, which you can make a database that accounts for that. So yeah, I mean, and also most other jurisdictions now have moved to open versions of open court systems where everything's publicly accessible online. There are many states right now in America where I have basically full access to reasoning, decisions, names, charges, everything.
Motions. Yeah,
Motions.
very basic stuff.
Very basic stuff. It's all there from my computer fingertips, but I can't get the most basic information from the Alberta court system. It's just wild.
This is kind of a confession as much as it is a comment, because I know this is not
yes, I know Canley exists. Sorry, but
no,
anyway.
I don't mean that. Yeah, Canley's okay. It's pretty rudimentary.
Canley's okay, but like every province needs to have a much more updated vertically. Anyway,
years ago, and this is the confession part. Years ago, I found out that someone I knew, not personally, but sort of broader social circle, had been arrested in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew every single thing about that about half an hour after I found out. And, you know, if it had been in Ontario, you'd hear, uh-oh, Bob got arrested.
Yep.
And you would be completely reliant
on rumor.
Yep. Whereas in the example of the gentleman in Florida, and it was a pretty serious, upsetting charge, found the name, found the docket, found the judge, and the prosecutors, the DA in Florida, had introduced as state's evidence an enormous volume of material from the investigation. And I read through it. I'm like, uh-oh, he guilty as fuck. Because it was, and I felt terrible.
Was he in fact found guilty as fuck?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if the judge phrased it that way, but this guy went away for a while. Yeah. He was doing bad things on the internet.
Oh.
And I knew him through one of his relatives. And it was all of a sudden sort of like this person I knew and liked had some family emergency going on. And then I heard a rumor about what it might be. And I just Googled it. And
there it was.
Next thing you know, I was reading the FBI report, right?
No,
so
we're down the garden path here, but can I make an argument here that going back to our original point, one thing that the Conservatives could absolutely be advised to do? Do you want one of the most strongest and most powerful things that we could do on the crime file? More open and transparent court charges and documents. We in Canada have this weird default toward privacy that is totally unjustified. Like I said, once you've been charged and your name is in the court system, that is public information. Nobody has the right to restrain the access to that information. But one of the most potent and powerful motivators against public disorder and crime is shame. Mm-hmm. That's why that information is public. We should be shaming people who are, charged and have to go through the process of crime, and then we should be public if they are found innocent as a part of the due process system. But if someone is charged with a crime, that should be very, very public, and that should be public on a trustworthy, open database that you can easily search. It's actually kind of an easy win-win for Conservatives because it's not actually bringing in more punitive policies. It builds on liberal traditions of openness of the court system and open court systems. And it also works on stigma, right? Like, no, if you get charged with a crime, that is going to be public information. If you're charged with a crime, go through a trial and found innocent, that is also going to be public information. And that's appropriate. But that's actually one of the easiest things that we could do to create a more robust criminal justice system would just be to create more openness and transparency around court searches and court documents.
I agree with you 95% of that, and I strongly disagree with 5%. And
right.
I've written this before. I think social media, the internet, etc., has changed the game. And I actually think, particularly for certain categories of crime, we should withhold the identity of the accused until they're convicted. And at that point, I actually would agree with you. Then you publish everything, and then we have the modernized courts record system. But one of the really interesting things I discovered years ago, and it was such a weird thing. This is one of those problems you wouldn't have imagined having 30 years ago. I'm gonna have to anonymize this because I don't want to blow anyone's cover. but there had been an allegation of sexual impropriety involving a minor
Okay.
that took place at a school.
Okay.
What began happening is that all the identity of the accused was covered by a publication ban. The identity of the victims was covered by a publication ban.
Sure.
But if you Googled the name of the school, autocomplete was giving you names.
Oh, no.
Because enough people had found out about what teacher had been accused and what students had been accused that they were Googling it. And then Google, being amoral,
Right.
was going, hey, people who search for the name of the school also
Right.
search for this teacher's name.
Right.
And people who search for the name of the school were also searching for this student's name. So you would search the name of the school because like that was the.
But that has nothing to do with open courts.
I know, but this is why I think we need to start thinking the algorithms a little bit.
We could think
so
about
for certain crimes, I would actually go with a default publication ban, except when it's an investigatory necessity. So I would like to flip to actual anonymous charges, but if you're acquitted, you're good. If you're convicted, then it gets released today in court.
Yeah,
so and so was convicted of this crime, and here's all the documents.
But we can create a more open court system that takes that into consideration by doing exactly as you're saying. If
that's why I'm with you 95%.
Yeah, if the crime involves anything involving a sexual impropriety, there's a publication ban on it until someone is convicted, and then the name of the convicted is
the
released.
convict. Yeah.
I think that's perfectly appropriate. But I would just remind people is that I'm not suggesting any radical change. This is literally how our court system already works.
In theory.
Well, in theory, the problem is that the actual court system isn't working the way that it's supposed to be working because they're putting physical access barriers in charge of getting information.
Well, it's also an efficiency thing, though. Like I've actually spoken with lawyer friends of mine about like workplace injuries, repetitive stress injuries from dragging like dollies up courthouse steps with 7 or 8 boxes of paper material that have been bungee corded together, and they're hurting their back.
Well, I don't think you can get out of the paper problem, but like
iPads.
I said, more open and transparent court accessibility on criminal files is just an easy win all around. But anyway, I'm off the garden path now.
Yeah, that was quite the stroll. You want to talk about Alberta?
Quite the stroll. I want to talk briefly about Alberta, but like, there's nothing really more to be said on the Alberta separatism file that I feel like I haven't already said. Anybody who hasn't checked it out, I wrote a column about how Daniel Smith is destroying my kitchen at www.readtheline.ca, and people seem to really enjoy it. I just want to say, like, look, I think that Daniel Smith did something very telling this week, and I think she did something really smart this week. But I don't know whether or not the smart thing she did was undermined by the very telling thing she did. So she was asked pretty point blank about her support for separation, and I think she had an inadvertent moment of honesty when she said something to the effect of, well, if I don't tacitly support separatism or give people a channel for supporting separatism, they'll just form their new party, their own party.
Yep.
Which to me was, okay, you're telling me a lot with that statement. Firstly, is it possible that an Alberta separatist party would form if Daniel Smith were not proposing legislation that would actively make it easier for separatists to force a referendum on the rest of the province? Yes, that's possible. Let them.
Yeah.
Alberta's had separatist parties before. They go nowhere. They go nowhere for a reason. We've actually even elected separatist MLAs to Parliament. One. Like, if you can't control your own caucus and govern the province because of that fear, then your grasp on power in your party and in the province is tenuous. That's what that's actually telling me. Because a single issue Alberta Separatist Party shouldn't really be an electoral threat to a mainstream conservative party in Alberta. That, especially when you've got the NDP running at 27%. That just doesn't seem like, if you're telling me that a single issue Alberta Separatist Party run by people whom I quite like, but like Corey Morgan and Jeffrey Rath is a threat to your power, your grasp on power is razor thin. It's just by a hair, man. you should be able to fend that off pretty easily. Secondly, I think that it's really tempting to look at some of the polling data on this issue and say, well, up to 25, maybe 30% of the province supports the idea of some form of referendum or some form of independence or some form of the U.S. if we're joining the U.S. Like it's always kind of conflated, right? But some form of not divorced from Canada, right? Up to 30%. Those numbers don't surprise me. At the height of Wexit a couple of years ago, there was some polling that suggested it was as high as 33. So it would be really tempting to look at that and say, well, shit, I'm going to lose half my party if I don't support this. Half my party is gonna leave me, and I'm going to be left with a 25% rump. No. Because the problem with that logic is that within that 33%, there are gradations of support for some form of independence. And by the way, also, I point out the actual question is always nebulous, right? There's going to be some percentage of that 33 that's going to be hard, yes, one issue vote, separate now. Some percentage. There's going to be some percentage that's like, I'm really just pissed off and I'm angry and I'm registering a protest vote. And there's going to be some percentage that's like, I might be open to like a US type of economic union. And there's going to be some percentage who, that 33%, there's going to be a lot of diversity within that 33%. And you've got to ask yourself, what percentage of that 33 is going to vote for an Alberta separatist party? Not 33, right? There's maybe like 10% of that 33%, maybe a little higher, but like maybe 10% of that of the UCP would defect to a one-issue separatist party, right? But 33 probably at this point wouldn't, unless you continue to stoke this situation that you're stoking right now. So it was just a really telling statement to me. I thought it was really interesting. It tells me that Danielle Smith is very insecure in her leadership and her ability to lead people. She's very insecure in that ability, if that's something she's afraid of. And I think it's strategically, numerically incorrect. Just because someone answers a pollster and says, yeah, I'd separate Alberta, that doesn't mean they won't vote UCP in the next election. Yeah. That's not it just because the UCP isn't on board with that. People have disagreements with actual policies within parties all the time. Usually people vote for a party on a range of different issues. They'll vote for a party that most closely aligns with their general sort of points of view, but they understand that a party may have a specific disagreement or this or that issue. So what percentage of that 30%, and I'm being conservative here, what percentage of that 30% are going to defect from the UCP and go vote for, the Cam Davies Alberta Republican Party? If you think that percentage is high enough to threaten your leadership, you're telling me that you're very insecure in your leadership. So that I thought was kind of interesting. Then
Can I thought she did something before you tell me the thing you thought.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, I don't want to go fully down the garden path on separatism, but yes, please.
Couple things. Mm-hmm. Big picture, small picture. Big picture, a former politician, I'm not close with them, but I had the opportunity to speak with them quite candidly once, and I kind of asked, like, hey, how's it back being as a civilian? And he said to me, I get to think about real things again. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And it was off the record. He could speak comfortably. And he said, when I was thinking about getting into politics, and he says, I think this is true of every politician. Doesn't matter left, right, centers, whatever. You're focused on the big issues, the issues that matter to people, the global stuff, the municipal stuff, whatever it is. Like, you're focused on that stuff. That's all you think about. Maybe you think a little bit about fundraising and door knocking and things like that, but like 99% of your effort is the big picture. Here are the problems we're here to solve. And then you get elected, and 99% of your time is office bullshit and petty politicking.
Yeah.
And pretty soon you have entire governments that are consumed not with the fact, and it's something God knows you and I've talked about this a billion times before, that the world is going to rat shit, that our economy's in bad shape, that our military can't fight, the healthcare system is a disaster.
And you're spending 99% of your time fighting with a backbencher about who got the biggest office.
Yeah. Or who leaked the memo, or shit, we're down 3 points in the polls, or fuck, those other guys are tweeting against us. And the big issues don't go away. You haven't forgotten about them. You're still emotionally invested in them, but your day is just filled with bullshit. And I think some of what you're describing is Danielle Smith losing the plot. And I don't mean that in a particular swipe against her. I don't think separatism is the biggest issue facing Albertans today. It could become that if they fuck it up. But you've made this point many, many times before. This is not what you're hearing at the playground and the bakeries. But it's going to be what consumes.
And what I am hearing it from the normies, the people who aren't listening to our podcast and who are
they're pissed off at it.
Yeah, they're just like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't.
It's not what they're worried about.
It's not what they're worried about.
And this happens to government. So this is not a swipe at Danielle Smith in particular. This happens to government. There is this uncoupling between what the people are caring about and talking about and what you understood before you were in government because you were one of them. But then you're not anymore, and you uncouple. But the other position was more tactical to what you said. You talked about Danielle Smith not being secure in her job. I would not advise any UCP leader to get overly comfy in that office.
No,
let's just think of recent history, right? Like the UCP seems to have some problems on that.
The UCP is always the head of this job. Premier of Alberta has always been a poison chalice. Like it's a really hard job to maintain caucus unity. The problem is that part of what it is to lead. Okay, do you know? Again, I'm going to rephrase this thing that I mentioned a couple podcasts ago. How do you tell a leader? How do you identify a leader?
They have followers, as per Jen Gerson.
They have followers. Danielle Smith's job is not to follow the most recalcitrant elements of her caucus. Her job is to lead her caucus. Her job is not to follow the 20% of Albertans who are ginning up anger around a separation. Her job is to lead 100% of Albertans, right? Like, the problem that Smith runs into all the time is that she struggles with this. And I think she struggles with this because she has a genuine sense of empathy. She hears people being angry or upset or whatever, and she feels for them. I think she genuinely feels for them and wants to solve their problems. But what she doesn't realize is that while she's genuinely empathizing with the 10% of people who are most upset, she's actively alienating the 90% of people who aren't so upset that they want to separate the province and who actually think that's a crazy idea. Right? Her empathy goes toward the people who are most emotive in front of her. And that creates its own kind of blind spots, right? But the problem here is that you can't, at a certain point, you have to have enough faith in your own moral authority to look the angriest members of your caucus in the eye and say, I'm the boss, bitch. This is the line. Get in the truck or get the fuck out. And you have to do that with the faith of knowing that I don't want to use the word fringe because that's clearly triggering for a lot of people, but the fringe is fringe for a reason. Because they don't have what you, the leader, has. They don't have the leadership qualities that we've invested in you as a leader. If they did, they'd be the leader and you'd be the fringe. So, to me, it strikes me as a really misplaced insecurity that she has in her leadership that displays for me. I don't think she needs to be that insecure about her leadership. I think she can afford to lose some of these people and still run a unified caucus. And if she can't, then the party's dysfunctional and probably shouldn't be in power anymore.
My views on Doug Ford as being a particularly useless marshmallow are on the record. The guy, but the one thing I admire about him, there's a couple things I admire about him, actually. Like if I had to write a compliment sandwich for Doug Ford, I could come up with some stuff. One of the things he's really good at is vaporizing the malcontents. You step out of line in Ford's caucus, you get like a warning. You do it again, you get shoved into the disintegration chamber. Poof, you're gone. Death recorded, like little puff of ash, and you're finished. And I admire that about him. It's not that I don't have a soft spot for the Mavericks in a caucus. I actually kind of do. But I also have a soft spot for the leaders who do not hesitate to put the mutineers against the wall.
Well, and also there's a balance in that too. Like you want to have dissent in your caucus and you want to have dissent around you and people saying like, I don't think this is a good idea. Here's what I don't think that's good. Until the decision is made. Until the decision is made. And then when the decision is made, you kind of have to be ruthless about it. And it would be a really bad thing for me to do. Like, I'd hate that. I'd hate that for that reason. I'd hate being ruthless in that scenario. I'm not that kind of person. I don't have that in me. I'm more of a dissenter than a leader, right? But I think this is the problem. She's trying to please everybody. She's a people pleaser. But in her desire to please everybody, she's following her followers, and that's a risk for a leader. So anyway, I don't want to say that. Here's one thing that I think she did that was really smart this week. Okay?
Compliment sandwich.
Well, I'm not trying to compliment sandwich, but I mean, I genuinely think this was smart. She started to shift the framework around her rhetoric on equalization, and she got Newfoundland on side. She basically said, look, BC, Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario shouldn't be collecting equalization. Equalization should be a means of stabilizing social support for the genuinely poorest provinces. If Ontario and Quebec are getting subsidized by poorer provinces, that's crazy. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't follow the logic of the program. You know, if Ontario and Quebec can't basically keep their own ship afloat without welfare from the federal government, a welfare top up from the federal government, that's on them, and they should be suffering the consequences of that. Danielle, I'd be a little bit careful of that, because if oil continues to tank at the current rate that it's been tanking, Alberta might wind up being a half-not province, and we may be tapping ourselves out from the equalization check ourselves. But I think that's a winning argument. That's an argument that builds alliances, potentially with BC, certainly with Manitoba and with Atlantic Canada, to restructure and reframe the equalization formula in a way that is constructive. That's a good way of going about it. The problem I have with that is that she's doing this, in my opinion, correct strategic approach, but then talking about separation, like it's one step forward, two steps back. So there I have it. That's all I have to say about Alberta this week.
I think that's correct. Yeah. You have the Premier of Alberta actually making a pretty good point about issues of like how the Federation works and national unity at the same time, where she is doing all the things Jen has said she is doing. So
yeah, and then at the same time, entertaining a separation referendum because she's afraid that like the Independent Republic of Alberta party is gonna take off.
I don't. Maybe this is a question I should ask you off the air. But hey, let's go for it.
Let's go for it.
Was Smith involved in the purging of Kenney? Or did she step in? Because, for instance, Poilievre's people are the ones who took out O'Toole.
Yeah.
And I think some of that loser energy might be, some of the loser energy we've been seeing, we talked about it in the first segment, is maybe one of the reasons the Poilievre people are acting with such loser energy right now is because they know someone could do to them what they did to O'Toole.
Yeah, I mean...
Is there like a guilty conscience or sense of vulnerability?
Well, like I said, my understanding, and I will be corrected if my understanding is incorrect, is that no, she wasn't like masterminding the ouster of Kenney. Kenney lost for a lot of interesting reasons. The biggest one was that ultimately he set expectations way too high and failed to meet them. He tried to pander or follow to a certain base within the party that was very angry, especially over COVID restrictions, but he wasn't willing to go far enough to appease them. And then I think he would have survived that, but the real killer for Kenney is that he lost his caucus. Like, he was deeply alienated from his caucus. Like, if he had strong caucus support, he probably could have survived that leadership challenge. Like, people would have showed up for him, but he had managed to piss off and alienate a huge section of his caucus throughout all of this. Like I said, Alberta Premier poison chalice, absolutely. So yeah, I think there's certainly a fear of that, but I don't think that she was actively involved in the ouster. I think she stepped up when there was an
fear, but not
opportunity.
guilt.
Fear, but not guilt, I think is right.
I told you a couple of weeks ago that there's some people in Ontario right now in that Conservative caucus who are probably not feeling great about the deal they made a couple of years ago. All right, when we come back in a minute, we're really going to, in a moment of unity, we're going to pull everybody together. Jen wants to do the opposite of the thing you're supposed to do, which is talk about politics and religion together. So we're going to do it. We're going to do it next. God help us, perhaps literally. This is the Line Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, go to www.readtheline.ca, sign up. You'll get notifications when we publish new content. You can sign up for a free account. You're going to get 95% of what we publish absolutely free. We'll find ways to squeeze money out of you later. So don't hesitate to sign up. Read theline.ca. This is The Line Podcast. We're back in a moment. Every once in a while, we will surprise each other here. Life is full of surprises, and Jen and I will occasionally basically say to the other, trust me, for a segment. And I go, oh, we'll go, okay. I don't really know what Jen is going to talk about here. She has told me it is a mix of religion and politics, and I do know it is linked to the fact that we have a new pope. We talked a little bit about that the first segment, just how the church is good at the pageantry of it. But Jen, with some trepidation, I yield the floor to you.
Yeah, the last time this happened, it led to like an emotional breakdown on in camera. It was great. No, it's not going to be that kind of situation. So I have like a pet theory, and I don't know if it's a crazy theory or not, but I'm just going to throw it out there and see if there's anything to this pet theory.
I'm terrified, but yeah, okay.
Well, the pet theory is this, and that is I'm reading Tim Alberta's The Power, the Kingdom, and the Glory. Or The Kingdom, the Power, the Glory. And it's excellent because Tim Alberta comes from an evangelical American Christian home. He's a political reporter for Politico in DC, I believe. Really, really well-established politics guy. Knows his politics, American politics, inside and out. But he's also an evangelical Christian who can't remember exactly where he was born, but he was telling these stories. He was literally a pastor's son, right? And he was talking about what happened to the evangelical movement and the degree to which American evangelicism has become merged with a kind of conspiratorial hyper-patriotism. And a lot of Trump's rise, success, and moral establishment and moral legitimacy is coming from this hyper amped up version of Jerry Falwell's religious right, moral majority stuff that's just gone totally on crack. What happened is, you had the establishment of American evangelical churches. They became a little bit hooked on political influencing as a result of Jerry Falwell's project. And during COVID, especially, a lot of these churches just kind of went nuts. And they ran into something, the way that Tim Alberta explains it, he talks about what happened to these churches in ways that are just incredibly familiar to you and I. As in journalism, he talks about the audience capture problem, right? A lot of these pastors had to subsume their values and their gospel and their testament and start preaching essentially politics, and specifically increasingly deranged Republican politics, because that's what their audiences wanted.
Well, put bums in pews.
And the pastors
Kept
who
the
refused
donor box full too.
Yeah, and the evangelical pastors who refused to do this, or said, no, my job is to preach the gospel. I'm here to pastor to a flock. I'm not here to engage in the idolatry of the nation of America. Like their mega churches just collapsed and fell apart. So he's talking about this, and I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. This also really parallels with stuff that I have been doing research on about the Satanic Panic, which eventually is a book that will be written and finished. It was a lot of the Satanic Panic was fueled by evangelical churches that were becoming increasingly competitive with mainline Protestant churches. The culture war, we're out to fight the devil's in our rock and roll stuff, was really popular. Like it put bums in pews, right? And so the more bums that came in pews, the more sort of more conventional churches fell apart, the more the pastors had to sort of take up the mantle of this hybridized political religious subtext and a very sort of America, like America is the new land of Israel kind of American politics, that absolutely fused deep tribal partisan affiliation with religious doctrine, and oftentimes very poorly understood or interpreted religious doctrine. And the people within the evangelical movement who pushed back on that were the people who were very well theologically trained. Their position was, no, like our job here is not to establish America as a Christian kingdom. Our job here is to extol the kingdom of God, to understand that the kingdom of God is not found here on earth. It's found in spiritual community or heaven or whatever you want to call it. Fine. So this is a really fascinating tension within the evangelical church. I think Tim Alberta is a really excellent reporter. He does tons of interviews and he breaks down what's happening within his own community. But it's also a cri de coeur from Tim Alberta himself, who uses the gospel that he's grown up with and the teachings he's grown up with to rebut a lot of this, to rebut the theology of this, and said, no, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the Christian witness, and it's a degradation of the Christian witness in order to allow it to be used in this way. So I just find this really fascinating. I'm not an evangelical, was not raised in the evangelical church, had no idea what was normalized in evangelical churches. And Tim's a good reporter. He's just sort of explaining this and reporting on it, like reporting on what some of these movements are doing. And I'm like, wow, this is cray. Like, it's beyond. And it's being merged with this spiritual ecstasy, which makes it very, very hard to extricate from people, or to reason people out of. Going back to the conversation about, humans aren't rational, we're emotional monkeys. So this was just completely revelatory book for me. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it.
Is it, you know what? This is going to sound terrible, but I'm actually looking for a light read. Is it like a dense 800-page tome, or is this something
I've been listening to it over audiobook, so it hasn't felt like a dense read to me. But
okay. Because honestly, I think you've made Tim Alberta sell here. I'm interested in checking this out.
I'm going to reach out to Tim Alberta and see if I can get him on the line. And I know also as well that many sort of highly conservative Republican evangelicals now regard Tim Alberta as like an enemy at the gate kind of thing, which to me is just wild.
I think David French has some of that going on too.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yes, this is absolutely a lot of what we're seeing as an expression of American politics is a reflection of internecine denominational warfare, right?
Yeah. This
is actually another side conversation that I would have is, I think, especially in Canada, we have journalists have a tendency to be atheistic, if not secular, and we tend to regard religion as being kind of a fringe thing, or something that doesn't really concern our interest or our attention.
And every once in a while you see a stat like 70% of the population still believes in God, and a lot of our colleagues go,
Well, exactly.
No one in this newsroom does.
Exactly. And this is actually one of the major divides that we were talking about, how the divide isn't left wing, right wing. This is a perfect example of that. This is so foreign and alien to most of the journalistic class that it divides us from the culture we're covering, because we don't have the same experience of theology and religion and spirituality as the majority of the people we're actually covering. It's actually one of, I think, the biggest divides and disconnects between us and people. And it also means that we as journalists fundamentally miss trends that inevitably well up into culture and politics, because we're not in the pews. We're not hearing what's being preached. We're not involved in these communities. We don't know what's actually going on with something that is hugely important to the lives of the majority of the people we're actually trying to serve. I mean, I remember the National Post used to have a religion editor. And
Charlie.
Yeah. And that post got decommissioned along with like opera reporting, because it was considered basically a frivolous beat in a moment of extreme news resource scarcity, right? We have to focus our attention on serious things. We can't afford to be focusing on. I think that was wrong. Like, we are completely, as a journalistic class, we are completely out of touch with what's going on with religious currents until we see something like the Pope getting elected, right? And then it's like, oh, it's pageantry, it's interesting, it's fascinating. Aren't those people weird? But that was great to watch. Back to News at 11, right? But we are out of touch with a really important deep vein of what's happening in the culture around us as a result of our disconnection from religion. I think it's a major problem. It's a real issue. Anyway, that all sets up my actual pet theory. Can I sneak in just
a 10-second aside here?
Go for it.
I have a friend, American, urban professional, grew up in a rural area, and I remember her telling me once, and she might in fact hear this, about a tragedy where the response of everyone when it happened was sort of everybody gathered together and kind of got down on their knees and held hands and were praying. Mm-hmm. And I didn't say anything, but that struck me as weird. And I don't say that, I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but it was just like, I've been, sorry, this is going to sound weirdly dark, but like, here in Toronto, I have seen people having medical emergencies. I've seen a guy killed in a car crash. no one has held hands to pray. It's just the response to public tragedy in Toronto is not collective prayer. And when I heard my friend just kind of mention people taking each other's hands and praying and neighbors saying, we're praying for you and all that stuff, there's no judgment here. It actually sounded nice, but it was not what would have happened if it had happened to me.
Well, the problem that I think that a lot of journalists run into is that we're taught to be highly sort of cynical. And cynicism isn't
Or we
conducive.
come to it naturally. But
or we come to it naturally. Cynicism isn't conducive to faith, right? And there's a tendency, I think, among most journalists, even people who are kind of maybe soft religious, to say, look, this is all silly, supernatural, rational bullshit. And the people who, and also there's also a suspect undertone to that. And therefore the people who really believe it must also be kind of silly and supernatural and suspect, maybe dumb, right? Is kind of the unspoken part of that equation. And the problem that I have with that is, well, there's twofold. One is that I think that more you actually read into theology and read into religion, you realize some parts of it are silly and supernatural. And then you start to peel back the onion and you realize there's a whole wealth of human history here that's actually very deep and thoughtful and interesting, and it's worth understanding. It's worth exploring to see why people came to these conclusions the way that they did, why some of the most intelligent people in human history came to the conclusions that they did. And secondly, the same arguments that you can use against religion are often used against monarchy. We talked about monarchy last week. Well, yes, does it make sense that we invest any kind of even ceremonial leadership role in somebody just because of their position of birth? No, that is an irrational position. But constitutional monarchy works. It's there for a reason. And if you are an inherently small c conservative person, you operate under the assumption of, just because I don't understand what something is doing or what this institution is doing in society doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have an important role to play. And so I operate in a space where I am careful about tearing down, or at the very least cautious about tearing down safeguards and structures and institutional norms and all these sorts of things, because I can understand that I have imperfect knowledge of the system and how it works. Right? That is a very inherently conservative traditionalist viewpoint. It's not to say that I'm opposed to change or for, like, I'm not opposed to revolutionary change. I just think you have to make a very, very strong case for it. And the strong case for it has to be done with the humility of understanding that human societies are complicated and we don't always understand ourselves perfectly. We can't understand ourselves perfectly. And sometimes these things that seem irrational or wrong or silly or outdated are actually serving deep emotional functions for people that you just don't necessarily understand. That all brings me to my actual pet theory. Do you want to get into my actual pet theory? I needed to set that up extensively before I actually delved into the pet theory.
We're 12 minutes in, so I think at this point, if you didn't share the theory, it would
disappointed.
be weird.
Well, do you want to know what I realized as I was reading for Tim Alberta's book? Do you want to know one of the major differences between America and Canada?
There's tons, but that are relevant. We're less religious when we're secular. I don't
We're
know
more
if that's
Catholic. We're actually more Catholic. Evangelical Protestantism is way less of a thing here than it is in America.
Effectively, it's not a thing. I know
it's not a thing.
There are evangelical
some
churches in Canada, but as an organized religious force, yeah, it's not a thing.
Our leaders are overwhelmingly more Catholic. Stephen Harper was like the only Protestant leader in recent memory. I think everybody else has been Catholic or some version of Catholic.
I think it's a testament to Canadian views on religion that I had to think about it for a minute to even recall what religion they were.
Yeah, so we're more secular, but also
Mark Carney is a practicing Catholic. Justin Trudeau is Catholic.
At least lapsed Catholic.
Paul Martin was a quietly religiously faithful Catholic. I know Jean Chrétien was Catholic. I don't know.
Pierre Trudeau was also
Mulroney, I think, was Catholic. I don't know.
Mulroney was Catholic, I believe he was. Yeah.
Irish Catholic.
Yeah, and so this is distinct. This is important because there's a major difference between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church here. The stuff that Tim Alberta was describing as happening to his Protestant church
is not happening in the Catholic Church.
Wild to me as someone who grew up in the Catholic Church. And the reason why that is really, it's not to say that the Catholic Church doesn't dabble in politics or doesn't engage in politics. I remember sort of anti-abortion rhetoric happening as I grew up. But the idea that Catholics would be preached at by their priest to vote a certain way, no. Partisan politics, no. Like, I'm sure it happens. I'm sure there are churches out there where that happens. I haven't done like an extensive, thorough tour of every Catholic church. I'm sure it's out there, but that's real not normal. The stuff that Tim was describing happening in evangelical churches as being normalized, not normal in Catholic churches at all. Catholic churches are still, on the whole, highly connected to this idea of like the focus is on the kingdom of heaven. Partisan politics, that's Caesar unto Caesar's, and we're against abortion, but like they're not partisan. Catholic churches aren't partisan. That's not a thing. That would be a conflation of fundamental values and duties. That's a real huge difference. The other thing that I think was that my theory started to take root here. Do you know what actually started the CBC? Do you know why we started the CBC? The 10-second version of this is that we started the CBC because we were worried about American influence. Do you know specifically what American influence we were worried about that set off the commission that began the CBC?
No, short answer is no.
It was anti-Catholic bigotry. There was a bunch of Protestants in the U.S. who were spouting off about Catholics. And the Canadians listening to this through radio were going like, what the fuck is this? We have to protect our Catholic population from this nonsense. That's actually what started off the CBC, was that conflict. Defining institutional value.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, look at Alberta. Do you want to know what one of the conditions of joining Alberta was, of Alberta joining Confederation was in 1905? Separate funded Catholic school system.
That's still something we're dealing with in Ontario, too.
100%, right? Catholic schools and the Quiet Revolution in Quebec. I mean, Catholicism has had a huge impact on the history of the country, and I think it's still, even if you personally aren't Catholic, the culture of Catholicism really is a prevalent force within the country in a quiet way. And I think one of the big differences between the American evangelical movement and Catholicism is that Catholicism is not a national concept. Catholicism is the universal church, right? So the values and heads of the Catholic Church lie in a foreign land. And that's because you are here to serve the kingdom of God, not the kingdom here on earth. So, I mean, whatever criticisms you want to lay at the Catholic Church, I don't want to get into Catholic apologia. Really, I don't. But Catholicism
has someone ever criticized the Catholic Church?
Oh, a few people.
Is there something I don't know about?
There you go. Exactly. But the Catholic Church has remained very resilient to that kind of idolatrous patriotism. It doesn't engage in that. And I think that we see that reflected in the political culture of Canada. The idea that you would have, like, even Pierre Poilievre, he's not, like, starting rallies by tapping local evangelical pastors to get the crowd riled up. That's not a thing here. You know, like, the moral majority version of evangelical Christians' influence on conservative politics is fractional here to what it is in the United States. And that's because, bluntly, evangelical Protestants simply don't make up that large a number of the overall population. The largest Christian denomination is Catholic. So I don't know, like, is this a crazy pet theory? Is there something to this? Should I pursue this idea? Should I get Tim Alberta to talk on the show? Because I do think part of the reason why we have been comparatively, not totally, but comparatively more resistant to populist ideals might be stemmed in part from the fact that we have a culture that is a political culture that is much more Catholic than Protestant.
You know, I remember not that long ago, and I don't normally cover my ass this thoroughly, but to anyone watching or listening to this, to be clear, I'm telling you what someone else told me. It's not what I thought, okay? Mm-hmm. I am not a religious guy. I believe in God. I'm not atheist. I'm not secular, but I'm not into practicing organized religion. I'm not a team player. And to the extent that I'm interested in organized religion, I grew up with Jews. I have spent way more time in synagogue than church for events and marriages, funerals, and all that stuff. I am an extremely Jewish wasp.
Or an extremely waspy Jew.
Technically the other. But something I was told once was that the Catholic Church, kind of look at Quebec, like the whole Quiet Revolution. For many, many, many years, the Catholic Church has been a limiting force on sort of the economic and social development of Catholic countries, which is why WASPy countries in Northwestern Europe sort of outstripped in terms of economic growth and political development Italy or Spain or even France. And remember at the time, and this is why I don't want anyone to give me any bullshit about this. I remember at the time thinking that could be true. It could be incredibly prejudiced.
That strikes me as a reasonable hypothesis.
That it was kind of what it was like, look, I don't know if that is a true statement that would be borne out if we actually looked at the numbers. Or it could be just a remarkably anti-Catholic prejudice thing. And I don't know enough to know, and I don't care enough to find out.
Yeah.
So I remember hearing that. And just when you were talking to me over the last couple of minutes, I was just thinking of the guy who told me that, who's long since dead now. But I was just thinking about that because let's assume purely for the sake of argument, and I don't want anyone crawling up in my DMs here to say this is anti-Catholic.
No, we are literally... We're talking hypotheticals here, and I really want to buttress this. Right now, I'm still working through a pet theory that's germinating in the back of my mind. I don't know if I even support this pet theory.
Let's assume that the Catholic Church in the countries where it is a powerful influence is a moderating political influence. That probably, as this person told me many years ago, might have retarded the growth of political life and economic growth in some European countries, where Western European countries, I'm thinking Germany and the United Kingdom here, look at the 19th and 20th centuries. They did okay. I mean, up until they didn't.
And also some of the most, despite the sins of the Vatican, which were many during the Nazi regime, some of the most diligent and dedicated opponents of the Nazi regime were Catholic.
If the Catholic Church, again, has been, and I'm using this term in the non-politically incorrect variety, if it has been a retarding influence on political development, there might be a tipping point where that goes from hindrance to help, where it stops being a limiting factor and becomes a brake. And you're not, look, gosh, I'm fascinated by what you've been telling me about the Tim Alberta book, precisely because I don't know much about this stuff and I would like to know more. But I know enough about the United States to know that a lot of the truly bizarre, alienating and frightening MAGA weirdness that we have been looking at is linked inextricably with evangelical Christianity.
100% it is. That is not a disputable point at this point. And the other interesting thing, and this is just anecdotally, I'll point out, the conservatives that I know in America who are most uncomfortable with the rise of this, firstly, the MAGA phenomenon specifically, and with the weird conflation of religion and politics.
They're non-Protestant.
They're Catholic.
No, see, I'm going to disagree with you on that one, because when I was thinking of people...
just the ones I know. Just the ones I know.
Okay, the ones I know and I'm thinking of include an Orthodox Christian, a couple of Jews, and a Mormon.
Yep. There you go.
So that's why I went with non-Protestant instead of Catholic. But, the funny thing is, too, normally I would extol, in my sort of only partially interested way, I would extol Protestantism. I'm a very good Protestant. I'm not a regular church-going Protestant, but I very much believe in the Martin Luther version of a direct personal relationship with God in the language that I speak, reading the Bible in the language that I speak, with minimal hierarchical structures between me and God. My relationship with God is a personal one. I'm very Protestant in that sense. But if the Catholic Church is an effective brake against insanity, if the Mormon Church, if my Jewish friends, as outnumbered as they are, if my Orthodox friends, I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting
theory, right? It's an interesting theory.
And hopefully people will give us the benefit of us having said it was a theory, because I will go find the Alberta book and I will
go read the Alberta book. Go read the Alberta book and just I'm just saying I'm gonna get. I know, as I said, I want to get Tim Alberta on the line. Somebody knows Tim Alberta. Let me know. I'll reach out to him. I will try to get him on the line, and I'll put my theory out to him. I just think it's an interesting one.
Okay. You know what? Let's leave it there before we
All right.
start a religious war on top of the national unity crisis we've been pecking away
That's
at.
great. As if I hadn't pissed off enough people by talking about how I'm not supportive of Alberta separatism, I'm now going to turn into a Catholic supremacist.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great answer for me.
And enough about the fucking separatists. You know who also sucks? Protestants. Yeah. These are the kinds of conversations that drove my family out of Ireland. So, all right. We'll see how this one goes over. www.readtheline.ca. Check us out. Like and subscribe. Look for your dispatch. We'll see how much religious content we sneak into it. I didn't even mention my thoughts about the Pope, but you know what? I'm gonna exercise the better part
save
of
it
valor
for the
here.
dispatch.
Yeah, no, I am withdrawing from the battlefield relatively intact. So we'll see what we put into the dispatch. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk with you soon. I'm Matt Gurney. That's Jen Gerson. This is the Line Podcast. We'll see you on Tuesday for On the Line.